Welcome to the Courting Happiness podcast. This is a place where self-care becomes part of your day, a space where you'll learn evidence-based strategies to help your life, share it with those you love, and cultivate a well-being strategy at work. I'm your host, Dr. Kortni Alston. I'm a former news director, television reporter, turned happiness scholar, TEDx speaker, and transformational trainer. I also understand hardships. While working my dream job in television, I lived a nightmare of suddenly becoming a young widow after 86 days of marriage. I became committed to learning more about resilience, healing, and happiness. This is how I discovered my area of research, which is positive psychology. Now I'm living my calling of training individuals and organizations on happiness. And my new chapter begins with being happily engaged. The Courting and Courting Happiness is about a true courtship with happiness. The K in courting stands for the vulnerability of sharing my story and the infusion of science and so much more. You will learn how to commit to your well-being one episode at a time. Subscribe and share. So, are you ready? Let's get started. Welcome to episode 3. Time to grab your well-being journal. We're going to continue our discussion on gratitude. Our last episode, we talked about the benefits of gratitude, and I shared the value of having a gratitude jar and the scientific benefits of having a diary, and then also what those benefits in terms of what the science of gratitude is really all about. If you haven't had a chance to check that out yet, definitely check out episode 2, our previous episode. It will help you have a better understanding of the benefits and the value of being grateful, for even being grateful, in my case, for a perfect stranger. You'll find out more about that in episode 2. But let's talk about now really more about gratitude. As I mentioned, also the leading scholar in gratitude, his name is Dr. Robert Evans. And what I love so much about his work is Dr. Evans provides scientific benefits and provides evidence-based strategies concerning gratitude. I also value that he debunks myths concerning gratitude. Debunks myth. And today we're going to talk about those myths and really giving you an even clearer concept and an idea of the science and the benefits of gratitude. One of the myths he mentions is gratitude is just a naive form of positive thinking. You might have heard that before, right? A naive form of positive thinking. Remember, this is a myth. He adds that some say that gratitude ignores the reality of pain, suffering, and adversity, both traumatic upheavals and daily annoyances. But evidence shows that gratitude is much more than just pleasant thoughts. Gratitude can be humbling because it will allow us to become a good receiver of other support and generosity. That can be difficult for those of us who are better givers than receivers. So remember that. For those of us who are better givers than receivers, that could be a challenge for us. And if that's not you, I guarantee you probably know someone like that. I'm thinking about quite a few friends in my life that are great givers, and it's hard for them to receive. When a person, I should say, is grateful, it doesn't mean that you are free of negative emotions. Keep that in mind. When a person is grateful, it doesn't mean that you're free of negative emotions. It doesn't necessarily mean less anxiety or less unhappiness. But practicing gratitude can magnify positive feelings or emotions, and more simply, reduce negative ones. When I was practicing gratitude more than 20 years ago, when my late husband died, I was still grieving. But what I did, it made me really value the goodness that I had. So when I actually practiced gratitude, it allowed me to really value some of the goodness in my life, even though I was going through a time in my life that still, when I look back on it, is surreal. At that point, about 21 years ago, My mother was diagnosed with sarcoma cancer 3 weeks before my wedding with my late husband, Brian. So imagine that, right? Planning a wedding can be stressful anyway. And in this case, 3 weeks before my wedding, my mother was diagnosed with cancer. The interesting part is that my parents actually planned my wedding. My parents were, my dad is retired school administrator, and together my parents had a wonderful catering business and restaurant, and they were by the time they retired, they would retire their catering business, and so my parents literally planned my entire wedding for me while I was working as a television reporter in Midland, Texas, getting my career started, and then later making the transition to Philadelphia, where I was so happy because not only was it a market jump, it was a chance for me to actually live in the same area with my fiance, because at the time I was, I guess, over 1,800 miles away, living in Texas, getting my start in television. So my mother, again, was diagnosed with sarcoma cancer 3 weeks before my wedding with my late husband, Brian. My mother had emergency surgery. I couldn't imagine getting married because, my parents planned everything. Plus, I wanted my parents there, I wanted my mom there. But we did get married. We did get married on a date that we planned. But 86 days after we were married, he died. I remember standing in his parents', meaning my late husband's parents' bedroom, after I found out that it happened. And yet I remember looking at a mirror in the bedroom and being so grateful that I was his wife. I was so grateful that we followed through on it. But that didn't take away my negative emotions. I still dealt with grief. I still missed him. I still felt robbed of our life. But I did see the gift in gratitude. I was grateful for becoming his wife. So this comes with another myth that gratitude isn't possible or appropriate in the midst of adversity or suffering. Dr. Emmons says, and I quote, "On the contrary, in these circumstances, gratitude is vital." It's vital, Dr. Emmons says. And I understand that firsthand in regards to being a young widow and what gratitude did for me back then, even though I was going through so many hardships, right? I'm not only dealing with the sudden loss of a husband, now a late husband, but my mother was diagnosed with cancer 3 weeks before our wedding. And my mother would end up battling cancer for 17 years thereafter. But I was grateful for the fact that we actually got married on a day that we chose, and that I had time with my mom. Edmund says that gratitude helps us see the big picture. He adds that it can motivate us to tackle challenges. In another scientific study published by the Journal of Positive Psychology, participants were asked to recall an unpleasant memory. They were chosen randomly to complete one of 3 different writing exercises. They were asked to focus on positive aspects of an upsetting experience and to process how this would make them feel grateful. So process how this would make them feel grateful in this circumstance. The gratitude group shared feeling more closure and less unhappiness than those who didn't write about their experiences from a gratitude perspective. The grateful writers weren't told to ignore negative aspects of their memory, but they also seem more resilient. And resilience says so much, right? In regards to how we face challenges. So they seemed more resilient. So I can certainly see that from my experiences, but that doesn't take away from really what I felt 20 years ago. In this case, 21 years ago. I was still grieving. It was hard, but I do remember feeling grateful that I was able to be with my mother and what his life and death taught me. I changed, it still put me in a level of grief, but it had me look at the way things were on some levels. I feel that it made me more empathetic. It really woke me up in valuing time, meaningful experiences. Like I remember years ago, a simple trip to the grocery store would be a trip to the grocery store. But I remember after my late husband's death, and when my mother was sick and battling cancer, I treasured every trip to the grocery store with her. Every trip we took together, I just treasured it with her. So even the simple act of just, oh yeah, we're gonna go pick up lady fingers today, and to this day, 4 years after her death, I can go into a grocery store, guys, and I can see lady fingers, and depending on that day, I may smile or I may cry. I may cry because I miss her, but I smile because she was my mother, and I'm so grateful for the experiences that I had. So it clearly changed the way I process things, right? And also it changed the way of how I dealt with interpersonal relationships. So it was really important for me when I was letting people into my life, or people that were already into my life, letting them know what they mean to me, how important they were to me. That was very important for me in terms of making sure that they understood that they knew that, and the value as it relates to that. So clearly time really was an incredible teacher for me. And the interesting part of that is that when I would let people know how important they were to me in my life, I didn't let them know tomorrow or a year from now or 10 years from now, or I just understood time after being a widow so early on in my life. I will let them know now. So whatever I was doing, I would stop and do, and I would let them know. I would either write them a note, call, text, but I will let them know right now. So letting them know right now how phenomenal they are was one of the lessons that I'm grateful for that I learned along the way. One thing that I have learned about grief, that there isn't a one size fits all approach. What always kind of upset me as a widow is, as much as I value time, but I also had my own time in terms of processing when things happened, or what I was ready for, really. So I can recall individuals who never lost a spouse or sharing advice with me about, you need to move on, and 21 years ago, and letting me know about how they felt that I should have processed it. But the interesting part is that along the way, with this level of self-discovery in the journey, was learning really about the value of positive relationships and what that looked like. And so I learned along the way that friends that were highly empathetic were my greatest champions in going through grief. They just allowed me to go through the process. I also learned that the friends that were this way in my life, that I am so grateful for, that are in my circle now, they had a growth mindset and valued process. They also just happen to be rock stars in terms of just being incredibly empathetic, amazing people. I just love them. I love them so much. But one thing that Emmons says, right, Dr. Emmons provides a has a great dynamic in terms of converting adversity into prosperity. I like that. Converting adversity into prosperity. He asks the question, what personal strengths, think about it, what personal strengths have grown out of your experiences? I think by hearing my story, it kind of alludes to what my strengths are at this point, right? I mean, one of them is I value time. Another element is that I value the people in my life. It's like this heightened value in terms of the people in my life. But I want to ask you, if you're thinking about adversity, what personal strengths have grown out of your experience? Another question I want you to think about that he poses is, how has the bad experience benefited you? For me, I think it allows me to treasure the people in my life. It allows me to not take for granted a moment. I can recall when I was at a convention with my fiance, and he was out for meetings all day long because he's part of the board at our journalist organization, the convention that we have. And I remember writing these little love notes, and I put them like all over the room, and I had them all over the bed, and just letting him know how grateful I was for him. And I remember him walking in and seeing it and reading it. Of course, he took pictures of it. He archives everything. He's a journalist. He loves to archive all moments. But the reason why I could position or share or do that or position myself to even think about that was the fact that I understood the value of time. And I just said, you know what? I'm going to let him know how grateful I am for him. And I just looked around the hotel room and I said, oh, those little notepads that we find in hotel rooms, and it comes with the with the hotel pin right by the desk. I decided just to grab a couple of pieces of paper, probably took the whole pad, but and I just started writing what I was grateful for. So it taught me how to value time. Another question he poses, how has it put your life into perspective? So think about it. What has it done in terms of putting your life into perspective? What does that look like? And what kind of things do you now feel thankful or grateful for? One of the things that I have in my home and then also in my office on campus at the university is that I have this inspirational wall. I'm one of those individuals. I love seeing sayings all around me. Matter of fact, I start off every lecture with a quote to live by for my students, or a quote of the day. But on my inspirational wall, I love it. There's two things that that really stands out that I have on both of those walls in the office, and they both have these beautiful framed work, or beautiful framed sayings, I should say, that say grateful and thankful. Grateful and thankful. So think about that. What kind of things do you now feel thankful and grateful for? But I also like to add, if you're listening to this and you're grieving, practice self-compassion. Be kind to yourself. I'll talk more about self-compassion in future episodes, but be kind and be gentle. The attitude of gratitude is something that is very evident in my life. And it was really evident a couple of days ago. I wasn't feeling well. I've been sick for a few days, and and I'm in bed and I'm wondering about all the things I need to get done, but all the things that I am really proud of. And I thought about the people in my life. And I really thought about who they are. I will admit that while I was in bed, I was wondering, oh my gosh, I'm going to get so sick. I might not be able to record this episode, but I'm recording it. I'm really grateful for that. But I'm really grateful for just having that moment, thinking about the people in my life. See, being sick made me think about wonderful friends in my life who have been there for me, who've reached out to me, who've often come to my rescue or listened to me. And I also thought about the people that I speak to often, right? But then I also began to think about people who I haven't talked to in years, and like so long. But I decided I was going to do something. Here I am, sick in bed. They didn't know it. Some of them didn't know it. But I'm sick in bed, and I texted them to share how grateful I was for their friendship. Individual texts to each one. Because all of them have just been these incredible beings, human beings in my life. And I didn't want a moment to go past without them knowing it. The interesting part is their responses back were so beautiful. Some came as late as 1 a.m. There's no judgment. I don't mind a late night text. Actually, I love late night text, believe it or not. I'm that person, even if have fallen asleep, I love kind of getting up in the morning and seeing a late night text from a friend or from a group of friends. I have a group of girlfriends, and we call ourselves text support. And so we would text each other all day, every day. So I don't mind a late night text. But I remember seeing these late night texts when I got up in the morning from friends. And they're so special because it was all about us cheering each other on. I sent the message because I love them. I love them. I'm grateful for them. Some of these friends have seen me go through losing a spouse. They've seen me go through losing my mom. Some of them have been there when I was at my parents' home, at our family home, and I was there while my mother was dying. They were literally a room away from her deathbed, but they were there for me. I mean, these are incredible people who have, been there for me at some trying times, but then also been there for me at some incredible times in my life. I remember when I got my PhD, and one amazing, beautiful friend sent me beautiful yellow roses out of New York. And then when the pandemic happened, this same amazing friend also sent me a beautiful mask. I don't think I can do it justice by describing it, but every time I go out, someone stops me and says, "Oh my gosh, your mask is so beautiful." And that's because of her. That's because of her. That's because of so many incredible friends in my life that I met at so many different stages of my life, including when, I got divorced, and they were there. And then when I met my fiance, Ken Lemon, I had friends that called me up, and they were as excited as if he had proposed to them. These are my friends and we feel each other's joy. And I love them for that. I just love them. They're amazing people. So I had to let so many of them know on Friday while I was sitting here trying to nurse this cold away about how grateful I am for them and how much I appreciate their gift in regards to their friendship, because they're just incredible people. They're beautiful gift. And the interesting part is how they returned the message to me. They were just telling me how incredible I am as a friend. But the interesting part is that I loved just savoring every moment of how incredible each and every one of them are as friends. And it was great also hearing from people that I haven't talked to in a while. And even though we may not speak regularly because life happens, you get busy, it was wonderful letting them know how I think about them. And I was happy to hear how we think about each other. I wake up every morning, and one of the things that I say is that I'm grateful. I'm grateful for this new day. I want to tell you this, that I am really grateful for this podcast. I want to share something else with you. My hope is that in this podcast, that when you're listening, you will have a true sense of belonging, of learning more about science and how it can serve you, and being inspired by the stories that you hear, but also the stories that come from you. I'm hoping that when you hear certain things about certain elements and topics that we discuss in this podcast, it really comes back to you, to all things you, to be inspired by you and inspired by your loved ones and your circle, your stories, your gifts, and your treasures of gratitude. I can't believe that that it's time to end this episode, because I really want to hear about how gratitude is transforming your life. I want you to join the Courting Happiness podcast community. Don't forget it's courting. That's with a K. So Kourting. And are you ready to spread happiness? I hope you subscribe and share this podcast. Build commitment to well-being, starting with you and developing this domino effect with the people in your life, family, friends, coworkers, and those phenomenal positive relationships that you have. A new episode will be published every Thursday for this podcast. Continue to commit to your courting happiness journey. I want you to be well, be happier, and be kinder to yourself. I can't wait to see you next week.